A woman books a stay at an Airbnb not knowing what secrets the house holds. Sound cool? Because I'm here to talk about Barbarian from 2022. So, Barbarian was directed by Cregger, oddly enough, mostly known for his work on The Whitest Kids You Know from 2007 to 2011. I mean, I know people that call that show an absolute cult classic, but I've actually never seen it. I've only heard good things. And Barbarian was his first foray into horror, and he seemed to just go all in, not only directing but writing it as well. And the film stars Justin Long, Bill Skarsgard, Richard Brake, and Georgina Campbell as the lead. So I mean, really, to cut to the chase, sort of, this movie just has everything, and that's what makes it such a force in the horror universe, at least in my opinion. The great writing, the cinematography with a seeming emphasis on wide-angle shots, and of course the excellent cast. I mean, none of the characters here knew each other, and the way they meet is kind of brilliant. So it starts with Tess, played wonderfully by Georgina Campbell. She's traveled to Detroit for a job interview, and the first of many things go wrong as soon as she shows up to the rental house that she booked. The password worked for the key lockbox, but there was no key inside. After a few minutes of trying to get in, Keith, played by Bill Skarsgard, comes to the door. And it's actually a pretty great scene. He comes to the door and she's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "What? Who are you?" And it turns out that the house was double booked. So Keith and Tess are a bit suspicious of each other, as anyone would be. But it's late at night and they choose to both stay in the house, especially after getting to know each other. Meanwhile, actor A.J. Gilbride, played by Justin Long, is in the process of losing his career due to serious sexual abuse allegations. And I thought this was a super, kind of unique and interesting way to introduce this type of scenario in a horror movie. And we've seen this kind of thing over and over again with actors like T.J. Miller and, a bunch of others. In an attempt to come up with some quick cash, AJ decides to fly to Detroit so that he can sell a house that he owns there. Coincidentally, the same house that Tess and Keith are renting. And when he gets there, he's surprised to find it appearing as if someone is staying there, because the rental company says that nobody has rented it out in over a month and it was left perfectly cleaned. So who is listing this house online and why? Well, I can't tell you because that is where the twist lies. Instead, I'll beat around the bush a little and tell you about another storyline we get, only this one takes place in the 1980s. You meet a guy named Frank, and he owns the same house that this movie centers around. Frank is played by Richard Brake, and I have to say, he's a pretty chilling villain. He seems cold and emotionless and very obviously sociopathic. We really don't get a ton of him, but he's very effective here. And when you learn about the crimes he's committed, it's almost jaw-dropping. I'm not necessarily saying it's something we've never seen before, but just the way that it's done, it's disturbing as hell. And for me, it was the way that this was presented. Sometimes the less we see, the more disturbing things can be. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is some pretty shocking gore in this movie, but knowing when to back off a little bit and let some of these insane atrocities play, in our minds is really kind of masterful. So after seeing what was going on in that house in the 80s, you wonder what has been going on for the last 40 years. What has happened in between, this huge gap of time? What happened to Frank? Another thing I liked about Barbarian was the characters. This is a pretty small movie, really, with only a handful of characters, so they need to be interesting, or this just completely falls apart. Or you're left with a movie where you're just relying on great gore since nothing else is interesting. And I think that Cregger knew exactly that, because the characters actually get fleshed out properly, or at least as much as they could, with what time was available. And the themes of this movie are definitely sexual abuse and trauma, with the two bad guys being very different, but at their core, kind of the same. I really loved Georgina Campbell as the lead here, and not playing any kind of stereotype. She is a final girl and the hero. It fared pretty well in theaters, making back 10 times its budget during a pretty short theatrical run. And I'm giving Barbarian an 8 out of 10. I've watched it 3 times now, and I've enjoyed it the same every time. It may not be exactly perfect, sure, but it's smart and unique, and it just feels like a breath of fresh air to me. I'd recommend it to literally every single fan of horror. I personally can't see how you wouldn't like it. Cheers, guys.